Nature is made possible by public television stations, your gas company, and the gas industry, whose respect for nature and the environment is reflected in the underwriting of this series. America's gas industry provides 160 million people with natural gas energy all across the country.
Hi, I'm George Page for Nature. The Holy Land of the Middle East has been fought over for centuries. Israel, for example, is in our headlines almost every day. But the land of the Bible has a rich natural heritage that we rarely hear about. The rugged landscape and harsh terrain that have challenged man since the early nomadic tribes have also challenged the wildlife, resulting in many sturdy species that have changed little since biblical times. The winds across these hills find no leaves to rustle, no grass to whisper in. This is the ancient, barren wilderness of the Holy Land, the high and solitary place of the prophets, where it's written that God first planted a garden, and where he set the first living creatures. The tops of these mountains tower 1,500 feet above the valley floor, and the sheer cliffs rise to 1,000 feet, yet they're only slightly above sea level. This is a section of the gigantic Rift Valley that sweeps north from Kenya to Turkey, the greatest scar on the face of the earth. Here, the Rift Valley runs from south to north and forms part of the border of the state of Israel. The Dead Sea fills its deepest place. Our journey will take us from the central Negev desert and the Arava Valley across the Judean mountains and down to the shores of the Dead Sea. It's a journey which begins on hills hundreds of feet above the Mediterranean, crosses mountains, and ends at the lowest place on earth. By day, the temperature can climb to more than 110 degrees in the shade. At night, it can sink to 25. It bakes and it freezes. The older hills stand deeply scarred by centuries of weathering. Blocks fall away to the valley floor where they crumble. The smaller particles are washed away in winter floods, leaving the larger stones to form the desert pavement. Loose sand, weathered out of exposed sandstone, becomes the raw material of the desert sculptor, the wind. The elegant and aerodynamic shapes of dunes are piled high in the wind shadow of any obstacle. Sand dunes cover only a tiny portion of the desert. Their constantly shifting surfaces seem barren and inhospitable, but life thrives even here. Dunes are constantly on the move. As sand is swept over the dune's windward face, it cascades down the leeward or slip face, only a minor nuisance to the darkling beetles foraging for organic debris. Darkling beetles are superbly adapted to desert life. They're equipped with their own air conditioning system. An airspace beneath their fused wings keeps their bodies considerably cooler than their surface temperature. They're called sand runners because of the speed with which they can move over the shifting grains. They can do this because hairs on their feet spread out and act like snowshoes, keeping them from sinking into the scorching sand. Animals without feet had to evolve other strategies to move over the burning, shifting surface of the dunes. The side winding of the sand viper helps it stay on the surface of a fluid environment. Moving in this way, it touches the hot sand at only 2 points on its body. It hunts by lying in wait for passing prey. When it finds a convenient spot for ambush, it can settle so completely that only the eyes and tongue stay exposed. The desert monitor is too big to fall prey to the sand viper. In fact, it includes snakes in its own diet, as well as insects, geckos, and the smaller lizards. The monitor is active by day and can move remarkably fast for its size in the open sun. It's aggressive, pugnacious by nature, and it's the largest lizard in Israel. The caracal, also called the desert lynx, is a cat well adapted to life in the desert. They're so secretive that they were only rediscovered here 30 years ago. Its body color resembles the sand and the rocks. It's agile and strong and has the temperament of the domestic cat. When the young are ready to learn how to hunt, the mother brings them a jerboa to play with. This is the best training they can get for a future life which will depend on their prowess as hunters. The large ears help them to lose heat without losing moisture. After exertion, they can pump blood into the networks of veins near the skin surface in the ears to be cooled. On these waterless plains, only the specialist trees can survive. The acacia was well known to the ancient tribes of Israel. It was said to be the burning bush of Moses and the tree from which they made the Ark of the Covenant. It can search out layers of moisture hidden deep down in the wadi beds, with long roots that penetrate to a depth of 60 feet. As the acacia exploits the desert, the Dorcas gazelle exploits the acacia. This is one of the very few animals that don't need to drink at all. It can survive the hottest and driest summer by feeding on the acacia leaves in the early morning when they're still covered with dew. The gentle grace of the gazelle made it a favorite symbol of freedom to the Egyptians. Its name, Tabitha in Hebrew and Dorcas in Greek, is popular for girls. Its color is that of the land. The red-brown sides merge into the earth, and the slate-gray horns help break up their outline against the rocks. In the Bible, the nimble and fleet of foot were compared to the gazelle, slenderly built for speed, as fits an animal whose chief predator was the cheetah, now extinct in the Holy Land. The most commonly seen lizard in Israel today is the pale agama. The female Sinai agama wears a red patch on her side when she's getting interested in mating. When she's ready, she combines it with a blue head. These small lizards feed on insects. They can suddenly freeze into immobility so as not to scare off passing ants, and then whip around and pick off a quick snack. The dab lizard. The loose folds on its skin may stretch to accommodate its swollen body after drinking. It's a vegetarian and lacks a strong bite, so its only defense is an armored tail, which it can thrash around like a mace if attacked. The pillbug looks out of place in the harsh, dry brightness of the desert. We associate it with moist, dark places of damp and rotting vegetation. But here, these relatives of our own isopods manage to live in the desert by escaping desert conditions. They do this by living in deep burrows. They set off each morning to forage for food to keep the 150-odd offspring alive. Their digestive systems are adapted to extract nourishment from a diet of soil, supplemented by the living and dead tissues of plants. By far the most common of desert organisms, they live at a density of more than 1,500 per square yard, recycling organic debris much like earthworms do in more humid climates. It's been calculated that in the space of 12,000 years, the entire Negev desert will have passed through the stomachs of its resident isopods. Even the stork in heaven knows her appointed times, wrote the prophet Jeremiah, celebrating one of the annual spectacles of the Negev desert. Every year they come from their wintering grounds in Africa precisely on time. On their annual migration, between 300,000 and 400,000 white storks cross this desert, the only land bridge between Europe, Asia, and Africa. The storks rest at night and then fly to the feeding grounds before the earth heats up in the early morning. They were welcomed in ancient times as symbols of piety, because the young of the stork were said to repay parental care by looking after their parents when they grew up. They also cleared the inhabited valleys of garbage and offal, as well as frogs and serpents. But the storks come here for more than food. They also seek transportation. Their wings have tremendous power, but they need help to carry those great bodies across 3 continents twice a year. And here they find it. As the floor of the valley heats up, the air expands and is trapped, and then funneled upwards in soaring thermals by the sheer cliffs. The storks sense this, and they flap clumsily along the floor of the valley to wheel across and be borne up to cruising altitude by the hot air. The valley, wrote Isaiah, is a land shadowing with wings. But the valley feeds not only its host of passers-by, but a population of permanent residents, like the hoopoe lark, which probes the damper places under stones with its specially adapted beak in search of grubs and insects. When the hoopoe lark finds a promising feeding patch, it's impatient with intruders. Its unique flute-like call was said to be an inspiration to nomadic Bedouin musicians. The ants are a people not strong, says the book of Proverbs, but they prepare their meat in the summer. The harvester ant finds its meat by breaking into the dead heads of flowers. More than 70% of the seeds produced here in the Negev are taken by ants. Some are eaten directly in the nest, some are stored, but many fall by the wayside and await the rains for germination. In the Bible, the ant is held up to us as an example of untiring industry. She is said to be wise because she, having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth meat in the summer and gathereth her food in the harvest. These harvester ants are not exclusively vegetarians. A termite is a rich and valued source of moisture and protein. But if 2 colonies overlap, there is war. And it's war to the death. Sometimes the dried-up shrubs of the Negev seem to have suddenly burst into blossom. But these are not flowers, they're desert snails. They can sit out all day in the heat of the sun without baking in their shells, because their chalky whiteness reflects as much as 90% of the sun's infrared heating rays and filters out the harmful ultraviolet. They have a pad to close the shell when they're not eating, which fits so efficiently that they lose no moisture and remain cool, even in the most cruelly arid conditions. 85% of their body weight is water, and it's been calculated that they could last up to 500 hot summer days in the worst desert heat without suffering lethal damage. The desert locusts take moisture from the snails. The locust, food of John the Baptist, and still a Bedouin delicacy fried in butter, is a valuable source of scarce protein and fat in the desert. It's a tiny, frail creature when seen alone. but in huge numbers they can darken the sun and lay waste the earth. 100 years ago, the Parson naturalist Canon Tristram, in his journeys through the Holy Land, wrote that the skies were never completely empty. They were always enlivened, as he put it, by the high-circling griffin vulture. They were holy birds to the Egyptians and Assyrians because they seemed to stay aloft by supernatural powers, wheeling and circling all day without effort and dominating the skies. Today, the Negev Valley is their last stronghold, and there are only 69 pairs left in the entire country. Each evening, they gather at traditional roosting sites on the cliffs. They're superbly built for gliding, with great broad wings that can extend to almost 8 feet. They can use their feathered legs as brakes to slow a descent and bring them precisely to a landing spot. Of all the desert's night creatures, the most chilling is the scorpion. As the earth cools, they come out to hunt, having spent the heat of the day in burrows up to 5 feet deep. The scorpion's sting can kill or paralyze its prey, but one of its favorite foods is also equipped with poison: the centipede. Male scorpions are cannibals, and when they fight, the loser may be killed and eaten. As they wrestle and parry, each is looking for the chance to strike the head or mouth, the most vulnerable places, the only spots where the sting can be thrust home. There, the defenses are breached, and the loser staggers drunkenly as the poison takes effect. The victor leaves the arena. In a few moments, the poison will take its toll. Altogether milder of manner is the pygmy gecko, the world's smallest reptile. It lacks eyelids, so it cleans off the eyeball with its tongue. Even among the world's tiniest lizards, the line between love and hate is sometimes precariously narrow. The carpet viper takes its name from the pattern on its back. Its venom is neurotoxic. It's the most poisonous snake in Israel. Its bite can kill a man. The viper often makes a meal of a gecko, but sometimes it's too slow. And the gecko lives to hunt in its turn. The common shrew of the Negev is tiny, but its high metabolism gives it a rapacious appetite. It's a scavenger and can eat practically anything. It will tackle any insects it comes across. A nocturnal animal, its tiny eyes are almost blind, but it hardly needs to see in the dark as it packs a range of smelling receptors into that long snout, which give it the information it needs to find food. The shrew can eat 1.5 times its body weight a day without putting on fat. The bushy-tailed jerd has 3 entrances to its burrow to foil predators, and it regularly cleans them out, keeping them free of windblown sand. It lives along the cliffs of the Rift Valley, feeding mainly on seeds, and it can reach them in the most unpromising sites. The Centaurus plant is well armored with spines against marauding seed-eaters. But it's no match for the bushy-tailed jerd, which especially likes these seeds because they're oily and nutritious. But as the jerd stores seeds for the winter and sometimes forgets where they've been buried, it returns a favor to the plant by helping it propagate. When the golden spiny mouse finds a snail, a favorite delicacy, it drags it off to a place just outside its burrow, which becomes a snail's graveyard, carpeted with empty and broken shells. The mouse will never tackle the job of breaking a snail open on the spot because the shells are tough and the job could take some time, during which the mouse is vulnerable to predators. The viscous urine of the mouse is rich in minerals. Excreting them allows it to cope with a snail diet high in salts. Their concentrated urine was at one time greatly valued as a medicine. Dawn at the Maktesh Ramon reveals a fantastic window into the Earth. The largest crater on Earth, Its ragged 6-mile-wide gash plunges a quarter of a mile into the rock and stretches for 25 miles through the Negev highlands. It was created when the sedimentary rocks were uplifted to form a great dome. Hard, erosion-resistant rock formed a tough cap over the soft, fragile sediments of the core. But once erosive forces managed to cut through the hard cap rock at the top of the dome, the Ramon River quickly carried away the easily eroded rocks of the core. The tough rocks of the dome's sides were undermined and collapsed, creating the towering cliffs. The Maktesh acts like a huge natural oven. The sun's heat beats off the sheer cliffs, keeping temperatures much hotter within the valley than on the upland steppe above. The uplifting that created the Maktesh was caused by the growth of the Great Rift Valley, and it shares some of its violent volcanic history. Where faults split the rock, liquid magma squeezed up to form vertical dikes. About 120 million years ago, volcanoes sprouted from the valley floor. The black hills of the Maktesh are the somber remains of ancient volcanic craters. The basaltic lava spewed up, covering the freshwater lakes that filled the valley at the time. As lava cools, it contracts, of course, and may form shrinkage cracks. When it cools slowly and uniformly, these cracks form regular patterns, creating these giant natural columns of basalt. This slope has been given the whimsical name of the carpenter's shop. Even common sandstone can take on bizarre shapes in the Maktesh. This giant mushroom was sculpted by blasts of wind-blown sand against rock layers of varying hardness. These giant natural pillars have been given the name Solomon's Temple, after the most grandiose of the ancient Israelite kings. On the floor of the Maktesh are fossilized reminders that this region was once a seabed, part of the mighty Tethys Ocean that stretched from the Caribbean to India across what is now one of the driest regions on Earth. Ammonites from the open sea. Marine shells, snails, and sea urchins from warm, shallow seas now bake in the desert sun. But these striking red sand dunes never felt the rise and fall of an ocean tide. Long, extinct rivers carried the iron-rich sediments here from the Gulf of Eilat. As the iron in the sand oxidized, it gave the dunes their characteristic rusty hue. The desert wind did the rest. Only those plants and animals able to cope with the hottest of desert conditions can survive here. The sand lily and the Sternbergia can flower in all the heat and aridity of high summer in the desert by making use of the water stored in their underground tubers. The pistachio tree may survive for centuries on the sporadic rainfall, but its growth is exceedingly slow under these conditions. During the driest periods, it sheds its leaves and slips into dormancy, waiting for the next storm. Other plants, like the rose of Jericho, simply die. The Adesmia beetle can survive in the desert because it's enclosed in a watertight shell that keeps the moisture in. Even when the temperature is around 100 degrees, as early as 9 in the morning, she can move around in the open sun and feed. Her legs are long and flexible, so that in the cool of the early morning she can keep her body close to the sand and pick up warmth. As the day heats up, she straightens her legs and walks tall to stay clear of the baking earth. To lay her eggs, the beetle chooses a place close to stones where a little dew may have been preserved, and then, with her long ovipositor, she pushes them deep into the sand so they won't dry out. And then the miracle happens. A few drops of rain start to fall on the dry soil. The beetle scurries for shelter, and life returns to the dead earth. The rose of Jericho protects its seeds by encasing them within the fibers of the dead plant. Only when the conditions are right for germination, when the earth is moist, does it release them. The fibers that encase the seeds are so arranged that as they swell in the rain, they open. The rose of Jericho has a safety mechanism that delays the dispersal of seeds, so they're not released into too dry an environment after a passing shower. The first drops of rain open the capsule, but the seeds are held there until more rain falls, weakening and then finally breaking the membrane that holds the capsule together. The seeds are held close to the mother plant by mucilage, so they're not washed away, but remain in this favorable place for growth. They germinate rapidly, and within 6 hours, another plant is born. Other dry and desiccated plants, like the mesembryanthemum, swell and open after rain at exactly the speed you're watching here. Clouds in these lands are not, as they are with us, threatening symbols of unwelcome weather. They symbolized the presence of God, whose goodness is as a morning cloud. And it was the promise of the Lord to the ancient tribes of Israel that he would give them the rains in due season. When the upper part of the soil is wet, small particles stick together rapidly, so that the surface of the desert is quickly covered by an almost impermeable sheet, over which the rest of the rains wash into gullies. Here they form trickles, which swell into rivulets, which come together as streams, a rill, a race, and a torrent. To witness a flash flood in the Negev is to understand why the ancient peoples of the desert, Egyptians, Babylonians, as well as Hebrews, believed in a miraculous deluge sent by supernatural powers as part of their traditional mythology. The waters are overpowering in their progress, eroding rocks, destroying plants and animals that lie in their path. But they are also regenerating and necessary. Without floods, life in the wilderness would come to an end. The steady, repeated whirring of water on rock cuts deep into the face of the land. There's little warning of the approach of the first wave. A distant roaring in the hills, a sudden overpowering and unfamiliar smell of earth and wetness, of mud and trees and leaves. And then it comes, bringing new life to the dead land. In the wilderness shall the waters break out, wrote Job, and streams in the desert and the parched ground shall become a pool, and the thirsty land springs of water. The pools of water created by the flash floods are clear and deep, but they last for only a short time. Opportunistic life forms spring into being and rush to complete their life cycles. Brine shrimps may have lain for years as dried-up cysts in the desert sands. Now, hundreds of thousands have the chance to meet, to mate, and to breed. After only a few days, the females are pregnant, and their dark egg sacs can be seen. They must develop while the water lasts. The problem of water in the desert is that the scarce downpours are sudden and unpredictable. This was a problem faced by the first settlers here. When the Nabatean traders founded the city of Avdat, they could do so only because they captured the ephemeral waters by a runoff system, which is being revived in the Negev desert today. The engineers and architects of the 3rd century BC are teaching the desert dwellers of the 20th century. Though the surface water quickly vanishes, the life it brings soon shows forth. Ziziphus spina Christi, the tree the Muslims say will be with us in paradise. In a few days, the sands become carpeted with flowers. The yaknuk is a parasitic plant. Its roots stretch far underground to feed off nearby bushes. They even take from the host plant the pneumatic strength to break up the hard earth and push their flower heads into the sun. Only a few short weeks after the rain, the drought returns. The wilderness is barren again. But a few pools of water remain, and wherever they are, life exploits them. The sand grouse lives on a diet of dry seeds. It needs to drink at least twice a day and will fly up to 30 miles to find water. Because they have learned that predators lie in wait at springs, they're careful not to land close to the water. They come to earth some distance away and then walk warily down to drink. Their only protection is their camouflage and their timidity. Sand grouse thrive in extreme desert conditions like those in the Arava Valley. They have a high tolerance of heat stress, and they can regulate their body temperature. The Negev is at the crossroads of 3 continents, and these isolated springs are vital way stations for foreign migrants, like this black-winged stilt. They are also home to Israeli residents. This desert lark is a local bird. But the pied wagtail could have come from an English garden. While this hoopoe is a migrant which has traveled here, of all places, to breed. The blue-throat is a Russian migrant on its way back from Africa to northern Siberia. The female blackcap is also passing through, pausing only to build up her energy for the long flight. She's feeding on the fruit of the baccatus shrub, which in many desert places is the only source of fresh water. The wryneck, a shy and secretive bird. The red-throated pipit may be the farthest traveled of them all. These birds are on their way north to Alaska through Siberia. In the few places with enough wetlands to produce quantities of flying insects, we discover a true migration spectacular. Sharp-angled silhouettes slice through twilight skies as swallows gorge themselves one last time before their desperate flight over the wasteland. There are precious few of these vital staging areas, and here swallows assemble by the thousands, species mingling freely as they fuel up before launching themselves over the barren landscape. Morning finds a fat sand rat gathering the bitter leaves of the saltbush. It feeds by day, handy because most of its predators are active at night. But not all. Buzzards, which nest on nearby cliffs, are always keeping an eye out for such a juicy morsel. And migrating birds of prey like this black kite are eager to take advantage of any defensive lapse. It carries off saltbush leaves to keep its burrow cool and moist, and they are also a staple of its diet. The black kite, always the opportunist, is often first at a carcass. It's followed by the vultures, the griffins, which live here all year round, and the Egyptian vulture, which visits in the summer. The essential butcher is often the wolf, which first tears open the carcass and makes the flesh more easily available for all the others. A distant sound from the hills disturbs his meal. Male ibex, settling the oldest dispute in the history of the world. Before the mating season, the older males battle to establish who will have priority access to the females. This must be sorted out before they start on the serious and absorbing business of courtship. It's an archetypal drama played out in a theater as old as the earth itself. These are the Judean Mountains, the last barrier before the desert drops abruptly into the oppressive heat of the Valley of the Dead Sea. Beyond the mountains graze young bachelor herds of ibex. To the children of Israel, in their wanderings through the wilderness, the ibex were the wild goats of the mountains, a vital source of food. The sparse vegetation on which the ibex eke out a living gradually disappears as it approaches the poisoned shoreline of the Great Salt Sea. Here, on the edge of the Judean desert, is one of the most inhospitable regions on the surface of the planet. Despite a deceptively inviting shoreline, no life survives in these bitter and imprisoned waters. A site of desolation and destruction, this sea represents the wrath of nature and of God.
Nature is made possible by public television stations, your gas company, and America's gas industry, supplying natural gas across this land of ours, providing gas energy to fuel industry, warm homes, heat water, and cook meals for over 160 million people from coast to coast.
This is PBS.